Welcome to this session on diversity and data in AI. My name's Sarah Ray and I'm the editor at Global Government Forum. And we're going to be talking about why diversity in data and AI workforces matters and efforts underway to address the balance. And I'm delighted to be joined by Amanda Dahl, who's the Deputy Director of Digital Service Platforms at the Government Digital Service. So to set the scene for our thinking about this discussion, women make up half the UK population, but according to the Alan Turing Institute, only 22% of AI and data professionals are women, and they call this a troubling and persistent absence of women in these fields. As the use of data and AI are advancing in public services and elsewhere, we believe this is a concern, particularly as bias is one of the risks most often raised. So we want to delve into these topics with Amanda now. So Amanda, can you tell me what your initial thoughts on this topic are? Are things better than this high-level picture suggests, or is it something that also concerns you?
Thank you. No, I don't think that they're better than this suggests, to be honest. And I think that the thing that we need to think about is that this is a long-standing problem. Just because right now the lack of diversity is being attached to concepts like data and AI doesn't mean that it hasn't been this way in the field of technology for decades at this point. I began my career, for example, in the early 90s, and I was the only woman on a team of white males for probably the first 10, 15 years of my career. And that was just the way that it goes at that time. There wasn't a diversity of gender or of ethnicity. There wasn't a diversity of thought either, which I think is probably the most concerning part of the lack of diversity.
Excellent. So we see examples of what happens when public spaces are not designed for everyone that uses them. But as we go into the digital realm, what are some of the things that we need to be worried about? And why is this, as you say, it's a long-standing issue, but why do you think we particularly need to focus on it right now?
Well, so public spaces, I think, is really interesting. And there was a little thing that I was listening to this morning. It was in the 1800s, and there was a doctor in Hungary. And he realized that there was a really high maternal mortality rate in the hospital that he worked in. And he took a look at the data. So they were obviously analyzing data back then in the 1800s as well. And he noticed that there was a difference in maternal mortality with midwife-led births versus doctor-led births. And he decided to try to understand what was happening there. It turned out that the midwives were washing their hands before delivering the babies, whereas the doctors were coming straight from doing autopsies and then performing the deliveries. So the intervention that he put in place was very simple. He had the doctors wash their hands with a solution of bleach and lime water, and the maternal mortality rate plummeted dramatically. And we see examples of this sort of thing in the wider population all the time. The old stories of like crash test dummies that we know about now, that they were built for the male form, for example. But in the data space, there's a growing amount of examples where the lack of diversity, either in representation or in thought, has led to some really catastrophic outcomes. One example that comes to mind for me is with the Dutch government. Some of you might already be familiar with this scandal, but in the Netherlands, there was an automated child benefits system that was in place. And what it did was it used certain criteria to determine whether the parents, carers, single carers, etc., were eligible for childcare benefits. And if they were, they would receive the benefits. If they were determined later to not be eligible, then it would be considered fraud and they'd be ordered to pay back all the money that they had been paid in benefits. The important thing about this system is that it was determining whether there was fraud or not, as opposed to detecting the fraud. And I think that is the real key there, is determination without being able to contest it or understand how that decision was made, rather than just flagging potential cases for fraud, led to some really tragic outcomes for families in the Netherlands. There were people who were wiped out financially. There were families that had to pay back tens of thousands of dollars. There were divorces. There were even suicides as a result of this. And we've seen those sorts of things in the UK with the exam results scandal, the Horizon Post Office scandal. Any time where there's different sorts of AI and automation. I think the major concern here is less about LLMs per se, but automated decision-making systems, and really understanding what data goes into that and how decisions are made.
And obviously it's very important to avoid some of these risks, but also what do you see as the opportunities to improve public services by addressing this issue?
I think, first and foremost, obviously, I would say we need to dedicate ourselves to increasing diversity in our technology workforce, and whether that be ethnicity, gender, neurodiversity, socioeconomic diversity, all of those aspects are really important. Diversity of thought as well is really important. So if you're, there's a long pipeline to get people into tech and to encourage people into those careers. What do we do right now? Well, allyship is really important. So if you don't have a diverse team, you can do things like encourage people to say what they mean, say what they think, have open conversation, allow for debate and different ideas about how these systems are being designed. We're at a moment right now where we have the ability to shape a future where these systems are not harmful. And I believe that we as technologists have a responsibility to stand up for that, either through recruiting our teams and making sure that that representation is there. And if we're unable to do that, then being that representation, doing the user research, understanding the needs of the users and putting them first and foremost.
And if we talk about being an ally, what do you think that means?
So if you're looking at something like automated decision-making, machine learning, other types of AI, the data that you put in is what you get out, essentially. A lot of the problems that we've seen where systems have gone wrong has been in the quality of the data that goes in. And the human workforce that is involved, the kind of unsung, hidden human workforce that is involved in creating a lot of the data behind these systems is very low paid, is not necessarily incentivized to get it right, is not incentivized to label it correctly. So one of the things that you might be able to do is really look at like the features in your ML that you're labeling and ensure that the data that you're putting in is you're keeping good data hygiene, you don't have bias in the labels on your data that you're using to train your AI systems. You're not just looking at the happy path as well. You're looking at the unhappy path. You're understanding those use cases where things might go wrong. And where people fall down in tech teams is often that if you don't have the diverse voices in the room, you won't understand where things might go wrong because you don't have that lived experience. So to be an ally, you need to embody that lived experience, to look at the research, look at the insights, ensure that you're working with researchers who are talking to real human beings with real life experiences to help you really think about how things could go wrong, and try to put in place controls to prevent that. And if you can't put in place controls to prevent that, then make sure that you're focusing on transparency. So there should always be a human in the loop. You should ensure that in your teams. You should ensure that you're not kind of in one of these spaces where there's a group think of like technology will solve everything, AI is going to solve it all, and let's just move forward and break things. That sort of thing is not going to be the healthy way to do this and to get AI right.
So if we think more long term, what's your view on the root causes of this lack of diversity? And are there any efforts that you're aware of in the UK that you're involved in, or even internationally, that can shift the needle on this, you think?
Okay, so the root causes, remind me for the second question when I come to it. But the root causes, I'll just go back to my own experience. So as I said, I started in uni sort of in the early 90s. And to me, as a young woman, a career in technology was just not even on my radar. And it wasn't accessible. There was an electrical engineering and computer science department at my uni, and that was like for a certain profile of person, of which I was not. And I fell into working in technology, and I fell into it because people got to know me in a workplace, and we started to work together, and they started to show me things, and I learned on the job. And I was lucky in that respect. I understood that you can learn on the job, and that there are, I did some hands-on technology roles, and I did that probably the first 10 years of my career, but then I moved into things like product management. And I think that there's a major misunderstanding by women especially, I will say, young women, that it is an industry that is not for them. And it makes me really sad, because there's so much, our industry can benefit so much from the female perspective in a tech team. The benefits that the empathy and the teamwork aspects that women I've worked with bring to teams just make things run better. Things just function much better. And I think that what we're missing is when we say like, oh, girl, come to the girls who can code class and stuff like that. I think pink devices, those sorts of things just aren't going to hit a teenage girl. And they're just gonna like, okay, whatever, unless they really are interested in the subject. But understanding how to make an impact in society, and like the job that you do could actually impact people's lives for the better, for example, is a way to speak to young girls and get them interested in something like that. The other question was about what we're doing.
Yeah, but before that I was just going to ask, do you think that the civil service can shift the narrative in terms of how it advertises jobs and speaks about the work that's available?
I can speak for DCIT and GDS in particular, Government Digital Service. I think we're trying. I think that most of the people who come to work at GDS are extremely mission driven. And that's how I ended up there, was the idea of, I want to be a part of public service, I want to improve society, and this is the way I can do it, And I think that is happening now. That, I can have on the back of my phone, there's a Make an Impact sticker, which was from one of the GDS get-togethers, right? And that's what we try and encourage in our recruiting, and we try and encourage, as inclusive and diverse a recruiting process as we possibly can.
So yeah, are there any initiatives that you're aware of or involved in that sort of inspire you that they're going to make change?
Yeah, there's a few things. So I can talk a bit about the specific things that we do at GDS in terms of trying to bring people in from different backgrounds. So there's a number of things that you can do in your recruiting to make it more welcoming for people. One of the things that we do is make sure that all applications are anonymous. So they, names are stripped, genders are stripped, ethnicities are stripped, all of that sort of thing. It's just about the person, and I think that's really important. We are very encouraging for the neurodiverse community as well. So we've been piloting a program where we provide interview questions ahead of time to candidates. And it's so far, I think, has been quite successful because, neurodiverse candidates can often get really uncomfortable in an interview situation with the unknowns there. And so being able to provide those questions ahead of time is really helpful for them. And that's not just the kind of behavioral questions or the competency questions, but for some of our site reliability engineers, our developers, we also do the tech tests and give those questions to them in a way that they can take the time. And I find that I have an enormous neurodiverse community in my team now as a result of it, and they provide a really welcome perspective. So I feel like we've seen some great results with that. We do some targeted recruiting. So I know I kind of rolled my eyes at the girls who code stuff, right? But there are these groups like She Can Code or Black Women in Tech, those sorts of things, where our recruiting teams specifically go out to those kind of get-togethers and events to see if we can reach out and find people that are from these diverse backgrounds. We have every year we have a bunch of schoolgirls that come in as well, which is great fun. I've spent some time with them, and they're always just so eager. They're all from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, but incredibly enthusiastic and wanting to get into careers in tech. And it's so nice to be able to connect with them and to show them what it's really like to work in this place, and to show them not only that they are represented. There's enough of us already in GDS that they should feel comfortable, but they're represented and they're welcome. I think those are the kinds of things that we're trying to convey.
And do you feel that you're starting to feel the shift in terms of the types of applications you get and the teams that you're working with?
The pool is small. I think that's part of the problem. So it depends on the type, if we're looking at different kinds of diversity. I think that the neurodiverse community, we definitely see a higher rate of applicants from that community, which is fantastic. Ethnicity-wise, I think we have a pretty decent balance. Gender-wise, it's a little bit, it's not great on some of our working levels. I would say that the gender ratio could be improved. What I will say, though, is that across the digital center of government in DCIT, in GDS, and in CDDO, there is an astonishing number of female leaders. And our CEO at GDS is a woman now. Our leadership team, well, at one point we had 3 female directors. It's quite diverse for the industry, but right the way through the workforce, I would really like to see improvement there.
Well, for that, we want to put it out to the audience if anyone's got any questions for Amanda or any experiences you'd like to share from your organisations.
Yeah, you mentioned that your team's got more neurodiverse members in it. I just wondered if there's an example or two of a comment or suggestion that they've made that either reflected their neurodiverse background. If I think you get the gist of that.
What it's like to have a higher proportion in your teams.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know if this question is even appropriate. If there's a certain type of question or perspective on a project that you're doing that you hadn't considered, maybe.
I think it's really interesting what you do see. We have when I talk about neurodiversity, we have people on the autism spectrum, we have ADHD, we have dyslexia. I will say one of the interesting things is our Secretary of State has dyslexia, has been very open about it, and the way that we brief our Secretary of State has to be designed in a specific way for him. So normally civil service briefs are kind of long and wordy and they go on and explain the whole situation. For ours, it needs to be dyslexia friendly, which means, short, sharp bullets that you can quickly scan and take in the information and be done with it. So, that's the kind of policy adjustment that we've made to support neurodiversity. What we will see from some of our colleagues on the autism spectrum is because they don't necessarily have the sensitivity to social norms in the way that more neurotypical people have, they will get onto Slack, which is like a chat platform, and they will just say what they think. And sometimes that will rub people up the wrong way because they're being honest and they don't understand what's wrong with being honest. And so then what happens is you've had something raised, the truth has been kind of told to power, and in a lot of ways it's incredibly healthy that gets out there. We do have issues, there's a lot of social anxiety in our teams, and we will have things like teams where everybody keeps their camera off on a Zoom call, and the delivery manager feels really uncomfortable because they're the only person with a camera on talking to a sea of blank screens. And it's not that they're not participating, it's that they don't feel comfortable with it. So, you kind of take the rough with the smooth, and in the end, you end up with people pointing things out to you that you might not necessarily see from a neurotypical perspective, which is really helpful. Like, did you know that comment that you made was really, difficult for people to process? Or, did you know that the way that we're building this piece of software will mean that it's not going to be inclusive? I've noticed this accessibility issue. That sort of thing it definitely helps to have that diversity there.
Hi, I had a question on what advice would you give to people that want to kind of move into these spaces? And I mean specifically maybe women or people from minority backgrounds. I'm from the ONS, and getting kind of into the ONS from a low socioeconomic background and being an ethnic minority woman felt like a great way to get my foot in the door. And after kind of progressing, you kind of get to a point where you're involved in dialogues where you realize that you get your foot in the door, but then there's a brick wall at a certain point to what you feel like is your progression. And having read Invisible Women, the book, it made me think about how important my input can be, but sometimes it feels a bit difficult to progress past a certain point. So what would your advice be?
I know that problem. Yeah, I'm sorry that happens to you. I think it happens to a lot of us. And a good way to deal with that is around raising your profile, raising the visibility of your thought, and showing the value of your thought. Often, if you're sort of trapped in a situation where you've hit that brick wall, it might not mean that you have to leave that situation, but you have to find other ways around the wall. So it could be things like either taking on official assignments, like if you find a gap where something needs doing that you can kind of take and make your own, maybe outside, like a lateral thing, a small project that you can then outwardly demo, is a good way to do it. If you're not able to do some sort of project on the side like that, you don't have the time, things that you might be able to do is start writing things down. So raise your profile on social media, start blogging about your thoughts, and showing that you have that expertise. That won't necessarily help you immediately. It will start to build your credibility. And I would suggest that kind of the standard answer is to look for a mentor, but I don't think a mentor is really the most helpful in advancing when you've hit a brick wall. Instead, look for a sponsor. So the difference between a mentor and a sponsor is that the mentor will kind of show you ways to do things. The sponsor will open doors for you. And that's what you want to find is where are, and it could be maybe a slightly older generation of women in the workplace who you see, you admire, and they're willing to pull you up the ladder. And you're looking for those people who will sponsor you, see your talent, and just get to know them a little bit. Don't ask anything just yet. Just, develop a relationship, and then over time it might evolve into something because you'll be in their mind when that next assignment comes along.
Are there any other closing questions for Amanda? Oh, go on, Ian. You can probably shout.
Thanks. The government occasionally will get criticised in the media for hiring for diversity-specific roles. Sometimes, though, the coverage will certainly point out the salary as well, which can be kind of six-figure salaries for diversity-specific roles. A theoretical question, but if you were in the press office and were facing an inbound inquiry, which is why is your organisation spending a six-figure salary on a diversity-specific role? I imagine those inquiries do come in, actually. How would you advise answering them? Is there there's different ways you could answer them if you were to answer them. Is there kind of even hard data on we are doing... I suppose that's the question.
I would frame it in the reduction of risk. I would say that we are at risk of creating systems which will end up in the news with high-profile failures in the future. And one of the ways to prevent that is through ensuring that the data that goes into these systems and the way that the systems are designed is done in following responsible AI principles. Responsible AI principles include things like contestability and transparency, but they also include diversity of data, ensuring the quality of the data that goes in as well. So for me, it's risk mitigation. You're building a pipeline of a workforce that will stand a test of time as the UK population becomes more diverse over time. The government should be representative of the population as well.
And so just finally, before we close, I just want to ask you what you think the public sector's role is in influencing the private sector that provide a lot of these data and AI solutions.
I just spoke about the responsible AI framework, and I think that, some of my colleagues in DCIT are more on the policy side. I'm clearly on more of the delivery and operations side, building tools for government, services for government. But on the policy side of things, for example, DCIT has a responsible AI unit, and they've put together a framework of what good can look like. There's also work on AI regulation. I know the last government did a kind of a business-friendly approach to AI regulation was kind of what came out of DCIT, and I think that this government is probably looking to rethink that a bit. And there's a balance on the policy side around regulation and how to encourage, private sector growth, but at the same time ensuring that it's done in a responsible way and an accountable way as well. And so I think the digital center of government is a place where that influence can happen.
Thank you so much. Well, we're going to close the session there, but I just want to thank Amanda so much for her honest insights on this topic, and thank you for coming to see us in your lunch break.